Sacred Sites with Steve Ray, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
So today we're in Ephesus, and we already went through the big theater, and we came to the Celsius Library, and now we're going to head off into a field to see the Church of St. Mary, but it's just in ruins today, and I already talked about that, but that's where they had the big ecumenical council, the third ecumenical council in 431, where they even got very argumentative. It's back in the days when bishops got really animated about the truth and they got involved in it. There's even rumors that there was punching and fighting a little bit going on there, but a lot of excommunications on it. Anyway, came out that Mary was the mother of God, and that was the result. But on the way there, we stopped to use the toilets, and I know we talk about that frequently in this, but the reality is it's really a major part of a pilgrimage, because I can miss a lot of sites, but if I miss this site, I'm in big trouble with the whole group. But in the Middle East and in Turkey, where we are now, and in most of the world, toilets were just a hole in the ground for a long time, and that's the way it was. And it was like that in Turkey. But I remember the transition from the hole in the ground where you would just go squat over the hole to the day when they put real toilets in. But all of the people who used to just have the hole, they thought they had to stand on top of the toilet seat in order to, it's like you have to still stand and squat over the hole. So they would have signs on all the toilets that said, the big red X, do not, and it has a picture of a guy standing on the toilet seat. Do not stand. Yes, it says sit. So, all of our people really got a kick out of that, because it's part of real life. And it's when you travel, you've got all kinds of different situations. Well, anyway, the next thing after that church, we go to Downton Abbey lunch, I like to call it. It's a rug factory, and they give us the most magnificent lunch in exchange for us offering people to buy rugs. And they also do a wonderful demonstration of how they take the silk and out of the cocoons, and everybody gets a chance to do this, to pull the silk out and watch how it's made and dyed and woven. They have people weaving these Turkish rugs. And it's really everybody really enjoys that demonstration. And then they also sell rugs. And a lot of our group buys them because that's kind of the thing to get when you're there. But then we go to my friend, his name is Alper. I've been working with him for 25 years. In Turkey there. They provide a magnificent, all of these tables with white tablecloths spread out under the trees outside. And you can see the big grills with the meat grilling, and they come with tuxedos, and they have wine and beer and Coke or whatever you want. And they serve us on these big, long white tables outside. It's just like Downton Abbey, all the best of the local Turkish foods. Nobody wants to leave there. But one of the specialties is when you're in Ephesus is the beer. It's called Ephes beer, or Ephesus. They actually make this Ephes beer. It's really good. Pilsen beer. Okay, now we go next up to a church. After this, we drive through a town, and it's in Selçuk, and it's up on a high place. And this is where they built the Church of St. John, because remember, John was the bishop there and took Mary with him. And so they built this wonderful church, and they built this to John. And before we get there, though, we go look out over the hill where the Temple of Artemis used to stand. And it was in a marshy area, so that it didn't last long. But remember, I said that this was the Temple of Artemis, where Paul got in a big fight, and 24,000 people filled the theater, and we're saying, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Anyway, that temple was huge. It was much larger than a football field, 180 feet long, 377 feet long, and it had 127 columns, 60-foot tall columns made of marble, and all of them are 6 feet in diameter. Can you imagine the opulence of that? But and they said that Artemis, an image of Artemis, fell from the sky, so they made this huge, glorious temple to Artemis. But today, when we look out over it, we show people where it was. And in my movie on St. Paul, we're actually at that site. We're looking up at it. And all there is now is they put up one of those marble columns with a stork that always has a nest up on the top of it. And that's marking the place where it used to be. So you wonder what happened to that temple, all the marble and all of the stone and all of that opulence. Well, the Christians took that up to the top, and they built the Church of St. John, which we're visiting now. a massive, beautiful church. And the Turks really don't understand the treasure they're sitting on, because if they really understood all the Christian sites that they had, they would exploit them much more. But a lot of these places are just weeds, and they just don't understand the treasure that they have. If this was in Israel, it would be all built up and it would be gorgeous, and there'd be, books on information as you go in and so on. But it was a huge church, and they built it with the marble and all the building materials of the temple they bring up and built the church. But then you see the church is all now in ruins, and you look down the hill and there's a mosque, and guess where all the marble and everything went after the Muslims took over? They destroyed the church, and you could see their mosque down the hill there, and that's where all of it went. So it's kind of like cannibalizing. See, there was no UNESCO back in those days to say, look, here's the Temple of Artemis. It's one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. We're going to keep this thing and put signs up and protect it. No, they didn't do that. There's no UNESCO back then. And so, but when we go into this church, it's really quite phenomenal to walk through there. And then where the altar was, there's like a big stone slab where the altar was, and John is buried underneath there. That was the tomb of St. John. He's the only one of the 12 apostles who didn't get martyred. He died of natural causes around the year 100, and he wrote his gospel right before he died, towards the end of the 1st century, because people said, John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke have written, but they didn't write about a lot of what Jesus did in Galilee, and they didn't. Can you please write us a spiritual gospel and explain more? And so John, he wrote that for them. I'm glad they pushed him to do that, because that's my favorite gospel. I even got a book on John's gospel that I wrote. So it's really an impressive place. And I remember, I'll show you a picture of my book. Anyway, this is my book on St. John's Gospel, and it's about 500 pages long. And I remember I took this book with me right after I finished writing it. And when we went to that Church of St. John in Ephesus, I remember taking that book and laying it on his tomb, and I just wept. I just wept and thought, 2,000 years later, this wonderful man who had his head on Jesus's chest during the upper room, and who was with him for 3 years, and who was there in the tomb when they saw that it was empty, and they saw the face cloth and the shroud, and they said they saw it and they believed. And here I am at his tomb, where just the dust that's left from his bones are under that altar. And I'm laying my book there, and I wept for a long time. But it's that I also, in my movie, The Apostolic Fathers, I give a talk there, and I do for all of my groups too. So you'll get the 30-second version of what I normally give in 20 minutes. But I tell that, as a convert to the Catholic Church, I used to think all early Christians were like evangelical Protestants or Baptists, But when I started studying, and I have visited all of the most ancient churches that were first built ever, whether they're in Egypt or Israel or Italy or Turkey. I visited all of them over the last 30 years. And I could tell you that they all had one thing in common, and this one is no exception. Every single one of them had an altar in the front. That was the center point of the church. That was the most important point of the church. Some people say, oh, no, the tabernacle. No, because there's nothing in the tabernacle if you don't have the altar. And the altar was the most important. But after Martin Luther came, they knocked down all the altars and they replaced them with podiums or lecterns, and it was a different religion. And I go through and I show people that this altar was here in the early centuries. Every church had an altar because that was the center of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. The early church was Catholic, and they didn't remove those altars until 1600 years later. So that church is really a beautiful place where I love to take people there and show them all of those things. After we leave that church, make our way through the vendors, get on our bus, we go back to the port. Our big ship is there waiting for us. But a lot of people go into the seafood restaurants along the side of the shore there because, boy, I'll tell you what, I love seafood, and some of the best seafood you're ever going to get pulled right out of the Mediterranean Sea and cooked there right in front of you. But anyway, that's the end of our trip to Ephesus. We'll see you next week going to Israel.
Sacred Sites with Steve Ray is heard live every Monday on the Guadalupe Radio Network program Morning Joy, hosted by Keith Downey. For more authentic Catholic content, go to grnonline.com/joy.